The crushing blackness of the deep ocean, 300 meters below the surface, where sunlight is a forgotten myth, a massive steel beast hangs motionless in the silent chill. Inside its pressure hull, a faint hum permeates the air, a vibration felt more in the bones than heard by the ears. It's the heartbeat of a machine that never sleeps. For 25 years, this sound has not stopped. Not once. 150 crew members breathe recycled air, drink desalinated water, and live in a sealed tube surrounded by infinite hostile darkness. Every light, every oxygen generator, every system keeping them alive draws power from a single, invisible source buried deep within the engineering spaces. That source is a nuclear reactor, and its core, a shimmering lattice of metal and ceramic, has been burning ceaselessly since the day the submarine first kissed the water. It has never been fed a fresh pellet of fuel, it has never opened its heart for a refuel, and it won't need to for another decade or more. This defies every instinct we have about energy. You fill your car with gasoline, and it empties in a week. Your phone craves a charger every night. Even a coal power plant devours trainloads of fuel every single day. Yet, concealed within the belly of a nuclear submarine is an engine that runs for a quarter of a century without pausing for a single sip of new fuel. The contradiction claws at the mind. Something is being consumed. Energy is pouring out in staggering quantities, enough to propel an 18,000-ton underwater vessel at high speed across entire oceans. But the fuel gauge barely moves. How can a material release such relentless fury for so long without depleting itself? The answer lies not in combustion, but in a slow, controlled unraveling of matter itself. Inside the reactor, individual uranium atoms are being split by invisible neutrons, releasing millions of times more energy than breaking a chemical bond in a burning fuel. This is not fire. This is a patient, statistical disintegration, governed by the elegant brutality of quantum physics. The reactor doesn't burn, it unzips, one atom at a time, year after year, holding a vast reservoir of latent energy, locked inside a few kilograms of heavy metal. The stakes are absolute. If that silent heartbeat were to falter, the submarine would quickly become a dead metal coffin, without propulsion, without breathable air, without heat. The crew's existence hangs on the fragile ballet of subatomic particles inside a pressure vessel. And yet, the engineers who designed this heart knew it had to demand nothing in return for decades. No pit stops, no refueling ports, no surrender to the corrosive passage of time. They built a machine that operates on a principle so alien to our daily experience that it feels like a quiet miracle. If you find yourself captivated by engineering solutions that operate at the very edge of physical laws, where a single mistake means catastrophe, subscribe and ring the bell now. We're about to dismantle this nuclear enigma piece by piece. But how do you contain a process that evolves over decades? How do you control a reaction that must instantly scale from a gentle warmth to a raging torrent of power when the submarine needs to escape danger? And what exactly sits inside that core, so dense with energy that a handful of it can drive a warship around the globe multiple times? The secrets lie in the fuel itself, a material engineered not just to burn, but to pace its own disintegration with biological patience. To understand this, we need to descend into the reactor compartment, crack a man-sized hatch, and stare directly into the glowing, dormant fury of the artificial sun. The reactor compartment is a cathedral of silent violence. The air itself feels thick, heavy with the scent of heated metal and ozone. Every surface hums with a low, hypnotic vibration, the song of forced circulation. And in the center of this steel temple sits the pressure vessel, a monolithic cylinder wrapped in layers of biological shielding. A man-sized hatch yawns open, revealing a darkness so absolute it seems to swallow the light. This is the threshold. Beyond this hatch, dormant and cold during maintenance, lies the core. But even cold, even silent, it radiates a presence, an unblinking pressure that whispers. Energy sleeps here. Step inside, imagine the core, not as a furnace, but as a library of incredibly dense metallic pages. Thousands of thin, pencil-like rods stand upright in a precise lattice, each one a fuel assembly. And inside each rod, stacked like a column of black ceramic pellets, sits the heart of the matter, uranium dioxide. Not a liquid, not a gas, a hard, gray-black ceramic, no larger than a fingertip. That single pellet, weighing just a handful of grams, holds the energy equivalent of nearly a ton of coal. You could hold it in your palm if it weren't screaming with invisible ionizing fury. This ceramic form is the first secret. It refuses to melt, even at temperatures that turn steel into butter, and it traps the most dangerous fission fragments inside its crystalline cage, keeping the cooling water pure for decades. But energy density alone doesn't explain a 25-year voyage. A bonfire of pure coal would exhaust itself in hours. The true magic lies in how this fuel paces its own consumption. The uranium inside those pellets is enriched, meaning the concentration of the fissile isotope uranium-235 has been boosted far beyond its natural whisper. And from the moment the reactor goes critical, that is, the moment a stable chain reaction begins, those U-235 atoms start splitting. Each fission releases a cascade of high-speed neutrons. Those neutrons slam into neighboring atoms, splitting them, releasing more neutrons in an exponential bloom. Uncontrolled, this bloom would flash into a nuclear fireball in a fraction of a heartbeat. So the core is poisoned, deliberately and with surgical precision. Interspersed with the fuel rods are control rods, fingers of neutron-hungry materials like hafnium or cadmium. Fully inserted, they swallow the neutrons whole, starving the reaction. Withdrawn slowly, they allow the sleeping giant to stir. But the true genius for long-term endurance is a burnable poison. Imagine an ingredient mixed directly into the ceramic fuel itself, an isotope that greedily absorbs neutrons at the beginning of the core's life, when the uranium is fresh and furious, and then gradually, atom by atom, transmutes into something transparent to neutrons as the years pass. It's a chemical clock, a slow release mechanism that perfectly compensates for the declining reactivity of the fuel. The artificial sun doesn't just burn, it regulates its own appetite, stretching a single meal into a decades-long feast. The neutrons flying through this lattice are moving too fast. A racing neutron is a clumsy tool. It tends to miss its uranium target, so the entire core is flooded with a moderator, ordinary water under immense pressure, heated to over 300 degrees Celsius but refusing to boil. This water does double duty. It slows the neutrons to a gentle thermal crawl, making them 1,000 times more likely to trigger fission. And it carries away the raw, blistering heat of the reaction. The water screams through the core, absorbing its primal fury, and then rushes into a steam generator, where it surrenders that heat without ever mixing with the secondary loop. It's a closed, silent ballet. No smoke, no flames. Just a whisper of superheated fluid transferring pure thermal energy, year after monotonous year. The silence down here is the most deceptive thing. There is no roar, no blazing inferno you can see. The core glows not with fire, but with a deep spectral Cherenkov blue, the light of particles breaking the speed limit of light in water. It's beautiful, hypnotic, and utterly deadly. The crew never enters this space when the reactor is alive. They monitor it from the control room, watching the neutron flux meters trace steady lines on a screen, listening for the slight shift in pump frequency that signals a problem. The core doesn't sleep while they sleep. It pulses with the same unwavering rhythm, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for nearly a quarter of a century. It is the most reliable machine ever built, a silent heartbeat that doesn't know fatigue. But a question hangs in the thick, humid air of the compartment. A reactor is not a clockwork toy, it accumulates poisons. Some fission fragments, like xenon-135, are voracious neutron absorbers that appear and decay with their own treacherous rhythm. If the submarine needs to suddenly surge in speed to escape a threat, the reactor must overcome these poisons. It must summon a reserve of reactivity, instantly waking from a gentle cruise to a raging sprint. How do you design a core that can sit idly for months, then respond with explosive power in seconds? The answer lies not in the fuel itself, but in a shadow system, a grid of sensors, pumps, and a fail-safe that you can't see. A system that must read the mind of the artificial sun before it speaks. We'll step into that control room next. The control room is a bunker within a bunker. Dim red light bathes the panels, a deliberate choice to preserve the night vision of the men who sit in burgundy leather chairs, their faces illuminated only by the soft green glow of reactor instrumentation. The air smells of warm electronics and faint ionization. There is no window, no porthole, no sense of the crushing black ocean outside. The entire universe shrinks to a semicircle of gauges and the steady, rhythmic thump of a coolant pump transmitted through the steel deck. In the center of this calm, a single officer rests his hand on a polished metal lever. That lever controls the control rods. It is a simple electromechanical interface, but it holds in check a force that could vaporize the entire vessel in seconds. The rods hang in the core on magnetic clutches. Power flows from the reactor to the turbines only because those rods are poised at a precise height, allowing just enough neutrons to slip past and find fresh uranium nuclei. But the secret to the 25-year heartbeat does not live in the rods, it lives in the core's birth. Before the submarine ever tasted salt water, engineers loaded its reactor with fuel that is fundamentally different from anything in the civilian world. At a commercial nuclear plant, uranium fuel contains perhaps 3 to 5% of the fissile isotope uranium-235. That fuel must be swapped every 18 to 24 months. But a naval reactor is fed a much richer diet. Its fuel is enriched to levels well above 90% uranium-235, weapon-grade concentrations, packed with an almost embarrassing surplus of potential energy. This extreme enrichment is the raw capital in the bank of reactivity. At the very first startup, the core possesses far more fissionable material than it needs. You cannot simply let that surplus run free, it would run away in an instant. So the reactor designers insert what they call burnable poisons. Imagine a chemical sponge that soaks up neutrons. Gadolinium oxide, mixed directly into the ceramic fuel pellets, acts as that sponge. Gadolinium has an enormous appetite for neutrons, and it grabs them before they can split more uranium. In the first year of operation, as uranium atoms split and the reactivity tries to dip, the gadolinium atoms are themselves slowly destroyed by absorbing those neutrons. They burn out at exactly the same rate the uranium depletes. The poison vanishes as the fuel ages. The two curves decline in lockstep, keeping the reactor's net reactivity almost perfectly flat for 2 decades. This is not a machine you simply switch on and off. It is a chemical and nuclear clock calibrated at a microscopic level. The fuel pellets are not just chunks of metal. They are a labyrinth of layered physics. The enrichment profile varies from the center of a pellet to its edge. The burnable poison is distributed in precise gradients. The entire core is a map of planned obsolescence, where every atom knows when it is supposed to die. Back in the control room, the officer's fingers tap a series of buttons to trim the reactor's temperature. The automatic control system is the shadow brain that reads the core's mind before it speaks. A thermocouple buried in the primary coolant loop sends a voltage signal to a comparator circuit. If the coolant temperature sags by half a degree, the circuit interprets this as a demand for more steam. With no human intervention, it energizes a motor-driven mechanism that withdraws the control rods a millimeter, just a millimeter. In that tiny movement, a few billion more neutrons find uranium, water splits, turbines spin, and the shaft horsepower surges. The entire sequence happens in a heartbeat, faster than a man can process the command, flank speed. But the true genius lies in coping with the poison that never stops accumulating, xenon-135. After a rapid power increase, xenon can suddenly bloom in concentration, threatening to strangle the reactor within hours in what engineers call a xenon pit. A commercial reactor, if it falls into this pit, may be stuck off for days. A submarine in hostile waters cannot afford that. So the core is given an extra reserve of reactivity, a margin deliberately designed above and beyond the poison's appetite. When the shadow brain senses the xenon wave coming, it pulls the rods just a fraction further. The reactor has enough excess fuel, enough unspent uranium, to overpower the poison and keep the turbines screaming. And what if everything else fails? What if the sea rips open a compartment, the sensors go blind, and the temperature climbs without bound? The magnetic clutches on the control rods are wired through a fail-safe bus. Loss of electrical power, no matter the cause, springs the clutches. Gravity and a blast of hydraulic pressure hurl the rods into the lower half of the core in under a second. That instant shutdown is called a scram, an acronym born in the earliest days of nuclear physics when a man with an axe stood ready to cut a rope. Here, thousands of feet below the surface, the axe is a silent circuit and the rope is a magnetic field. The system does not ask permission, it does not hesitate, it simply terminates the chain reaction before the crew even knows something went wrong. All of this, the gadolinium gradients, the weapons-grade fuel, the sub-millimeter rod movements, the automatic xenon override, weaves together into a single coherent promise. The core will burn for 25 years without a single refueling shutdown. When the submarine finally returns to port, its reactor will still have enough latent reactivity to cross an ocean twice over. The fuel will not be exhausted. It will simply have reached the end of its design lifetime, where material fatigue in the pressure vessel, not a lack of uranium, dictates the schedule. The artificial sun is never truly empty. It just waits, patient and silent, until the shipyard cuts it open and gives it a new heart. But that heart does not beat in isolation. It feeds an immense, silent circulatory system that never stops, never sleeps, and never sees the light of day. The core sits inside a pressure vessel forged from a single ingot of high-strength, low-alloy steel, a seamless shell designed to withstand 150 times the pressure of the atmosphere you breathe right now. Inside that vessel, at temperatures exceeding 300 degrees Celsius, water does not boil. Physics refuses to let it. The pressurizer, a narrow tower connected to the primary loop, maintains a pressure of over 2,000 pounds per square inch. At that crushing grip, water remains liquid far beyond its normal boiling point, a clear, dense fluid that carries heat away from the fuel plates with brutal efficiency. The water itself is a masterpiece of chemistry. Dissolved solids, chlorides, oxygen, every impurity is stripped away until the coolant approaches the purity of distilled laboratory water. A single grain of rust in this loop would become intensely radioactive, activated by the neutron flux, and then circulate as a death particle through the entire engine room. So the piping is lined with stainless steel alloys, and the chemistry is monitored every watch, every hour, for years on end. The primary coolant glows with a faint blue Cherenkov halo when the core is at power, a silent aurora sealed inside stainless steel pipes that no human eye will ever see directly. The heat moves through the walls of the steam generator tubes, from the primary water into a separate body of secondary water. That boundary, thousands of thin-walled Inconel tubes, is the last line between the reactor and the ship. On the secondary side, the pressure is lower. Here, water finally gets permission to boil. It flashes into steam in a matter of seconds. Dry, high-energy steam that screams down pipes toward the turbine. And here is where the invisible threat begins to creep in. Not from the machinery, but from the human nerve. The turbine deck is a cathedral of noise. A high-pitched, keening whine layers over a bass vibration that you feel in your teeth and in the marrow of your shins. The main engine turbines spin at thousands of revolutions per minute, twin rotors coupled to a reduction gear the size of a small truck. Those gears mesh with sub-millimeter precision, converting furious rotational speed into the slow, unstoppable torque that spins the propeller shaft. The shaft itself runs through the aft compartments, supported by bearings that have not seen a speck of outside air since the ship was commissioned. For the engineering crew, this noise becomes the normal state of existence. After a few weeks submerged, the brain learns to filter out the constant whine. But that filtering is the danger. A slight change in pitch, a new harmonic buried in the roar, these are the whispers of a machine beginning to suffer. A bearing starved of oil, a steam leak the size of a needlepoint, a valve that has spent 20 years cycling open and shut and is now one cycle away from cracking. The crew trains for years to hear these whispers, to wake from deep sleep when the engine note shifts by a single hertz. But the human auditory system was never designed for a campaign that lasts a quarter of a century. Fatigue dulls the edge. Routine smothers vigilance. And yet, the reactor core does not care about human fatigue. It burns on, relentless. The steam it generates spins not only the propulsion turbines, but also the turbogenerators, machines that produce every watt of electricity aboard. Lights, oxygen generators, scrubbers that pull carbon dioxide from the air, sonar, navigation, the electric galley that bakes bread at midnight. All of it traces back to the fission of uranium-235. The submarine is a closed-loop biosphere wrapped around a nuclear fire. The crew lives in a strange duality. 150 men and women breathe the same cubic meters of air, recycled through chemical beds, while the reactor gulps nothing at all. It asks for no oxygen, no combustion air. It simply converts mass into heat according to Einstein's quiet equation, a process so gentle that the fuel elements lose only a few kilograms of material over 2 decades. That mass loss, multiplied by the speed of light squared, is the ocean-crossing energy that pushes a 7,000-ton vessel through the deep. The deeper truth, the one that separates nuclear submariners from all other sailors, is that they are not riding a machine. They are tending a captive star, a star that was ignited once in a dry dock and will not be extinguished until the ship's operational life is over. They can turn it down, move the rods in, let the neutron population dwindle to a whisper. But the fission products locked in the fuel matrix, cesium, strontium, xenon, continue to decay, dumping heat into the core. That decay heat never stops. Even with the reactor fully shut down, the primary pumps must keep spinning, circulating water to carry the heat to the steam generators, and then out to the sea. Silence the pumps even for minutes, and the fuel plates will begin to cook. The water will boil locally, and a bubble of steam can form in a place where no bubble is meant to exist, threatening to insulate the fuel and push temperatures past the safety margins. So the submarine, even in its quietest moments, never truly sleeps. There is always the low, rhythmic hum of the coolant pumps, a heartbeat that persists for years on end. The engineering watchstanders walk their rounds, touching the bearings with the palm of a hand, reading gauges with eyes that have learned to spot a tremor in a needle. They log numbers. They taste the recycled air. They do this not for weeks, but for months at a stretch, in a world where the sun never rises and the stars are nothing but a memory. The reactor asks nothing of them but their attention. And the attention, over a quarter century, becomes the most fragile component of all. The secret to that quarter century of uninterrupted power lies not in a single dramatic breakthrough, but in a meticulous design of the neutron economy. The fuel in a naval reactor is not the low-enriched uranium of a commercial power plant. It is enriched to weapons-grade levels, often above 90% uranium-235. This density of fissile atoms is staggering. It allows the core to be physically compact, small enough to fit inside a pressure vessel barely larger than a family car, yet potent enough to cook steam for a decade or more. But enrichment alone is not enough. When the core is fresh, its reactivity is overwhelmingly high, like a wild stallion barely restrained. To tame it, engineers lace the fuel plates with burnable poisons, materials like gadolinium or boron that greedily swallow neutrons. These poisons are not impurities, they are a timer. As the reactor operates and uranium atoms split, the poison atoms themselves absorb neutrons and transmute into harmless elements, slowly clearing the neutron path. At the very same time, the uranium fuel is being consumed. The miracle of the design is that these two curves, the depletion of poison and the depletion of fuel, are balanced to cross over a span of 25 years. For the first half of its life, the reactor compensates by slowly withdrawing control rods, opening larger windows for neutrons to fly. The chief engineer watches a single needle on a gauge, rod height. Its slow outward creep is the only visible clock counting down the decades. Then, somewhere in the deep time of the third decade, the balance begins to tip. The burnable poisons are long gone. The fuel is tired, its enrichment slowly dropping, fission products building up as neutron-thirsty slag. The reactor can no longer sustain full power indefinitely. The rods are nearly all the way out. The submarine can still patrol, still dive, still listen, but the margins grow thin. The engineering crew knows the feel of it, the slight hesitation in steam pressure, the longer time it takes to answer a throttle bell. The machine, like an aging athlete, still performs, but it remembers every year. And then, one day, the core life is declared over. Not with a catastrophic failure, but with a quiet admission, the reactor can no longer guarantee the burst speed, the surge of power required in a tactical emergency. The submarine returns to port, the reactor is shut down for the final time, and the coolant pumps fall silent after a generation of ceaseless humming. The fuel, now laced with 25 years of fission daughters, is still intensely radioactive, still generating a decay heat that will require years of careful circulation. But the reactor vessel is cut open, the spent core extracted, and a new heart is lowered into the submarine's chest. The old core, having never seen the sun, is sent to a graveyard where it will glow with latent energy for centuries. There is a strange intimacy in this arrangement. A 22-year-old sailor steps aboard a submarine with a reactor that is already 10 years old. He serves his tour, he leaves, he grows into a civilian with a family and gray hair, and that same submarine, that same reactor, is still out there, somewhere beneath the surface, still running on the uranium it was fed the day he was born. The machine outlasts the man's entire career, his entire youth, bound by nothing more than the patience of atoms splitting quietly in the dark. The reactor asks nothing but water, attention, and time. And when the time finally runs out, it does not fail. It simply and profoundly has given all it had.